Hey community, welcome to our online service. We are so glad that you're with us today. Hey, before we get into worship, I just want to remind you that obviously we're not going to be meeting next week at Providence Christian School, nor are we going to be in the church building for Good Friday. But don't worry, we're still meeting, but we're meeting online. That's right, we're going to do our Good Friday service. It'll be online at 11 a.m. on Friday. And listen, you need to be ready to do communion, meaning make sure that you have all the elements because I'm going to take you through communion as a part of our Good Friday service. So make sure you got some bread, make sure you got some crackers or something like that, and some juice for you and for your family. And get ready, I'm going to carve out time so that you can do communion as a family. I'll lead you. It's going to be awesome. And then on Sunday morning, we want you to come back, join us again at 11 a.m. We're working on something creative, so I hope it all works out. It's going to be a great time together. So time of worship, a good word, a great salvation message. That's what I'm working on right now. And we're hoping to also deliver some packages to all of our families for our kids to have some stuff during the Easter Sunday, not just the service, but for the day. And so we do have a list of young families and all that kind of stuff. But if you want to ensure that we have your name, make sure that you connect with Madeline, our new interim community kids director. And so all you have to do is email her, madeline@communitychurch.ca. Well, that's it for the announcements. And I'm just going to throw it over to Hillary. Hillary, lead us into some worship. It's going to be a good morning together.
gentle whisper in the noise. Father, tell me everything's alright. Your power, your presence breaks strongholds. King of heaven, when you speak, mountains move. I believe there will be breakthrough. You alone can take my scars and piece by piece restore my heart. Take what's broken, make it whole again. Your power and your presence break strongholds. King of heaven, when you speak, mountains move. I believe there will be breakthrough in your power. Your presence breaks strongholds. King of heaven, when you speak, mountains move. I believe there will be breakthrough. There will be breakthrough. Shake the mountains, break the walls apart, open the heavens. Almighty God, you are overcomer, defender of my heart. By your power, the oceans open wide, your fire falls down, heaven and earth collide. King Jesus, forever by my side. Oh, shake the mountains, break the walls apart, open the heavens. Almighty God, you are overcomer, defender of my heart. Hey, by your power, the oceans open wide, your fire falls down, heaven and earth collide. King Jesus, forever by my side. Hey, your power, your presence breaks strongholds. King of heaven, when you speak, mountains move. I believe there will be breakthrough in your power and your presence breaks strongholds. King of heaven, when you speak, mountains move. I believe there will be breakthrough. Oh, there will be breakthrough. Oh, Jesus, there will be breakthrough. Shake the mountains, break the walls apart, open the heavens. Almighty God, you are overcomer, defender of my heart. It's who you are, by your power, the oceans open wide, your fire falls down,
Community Church. My name is Madeline, and this is my story. I have always been a perfectionist. I've always been hyper goal-oriented, but this became incredibly problematic and really toxic when I was in high school because all of my self-worth and all of my validation came from being successful and achieving all of these things that I expected of myself. And inevitably, when I would miss the mark, I would just be so defeated. I would feel so lost, so lonely and overwhelmed, afraid of being a failure, afraid of not being worthy. And in grade 11 and 12, I hit a particularly low point. Everything felt like it was so hard all of the time, and I didn't know how I could possibly measure up and be perfect at all of these different things. And it just really started to weigh so heavy on me. And it was taking away all of the joy that I was experiencing, whether it was at school with my friends or at skating or whatever it was. It just completely consumed me and really stole my joy. So I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep measuring myself this way. And I had to completely reroute my heart and reroute my thinking in God's truth and who He says I am and what He says about His love. And one verse that was really powerful for me was 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, and it is, "For my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." And I just think that is so important because we don't have to be perfect. We're not expected to be perfect. And actually, it's in our weaknesses, it's in our imperfections that God's love and His grace just comes in and makes us whole, and just His glory shines through us when we are weak and when we are imperfect. And so I just want to encourage you, Community Church, that you are so much more than your achievements, and that God's love is unconditional and not determined by what we as a society and as a world, what we think is important. That's my story. What's yours?
What an incredible time of worship. I trust that you enjoyed that. And man, what a great testimony. Would you just join me right now in prayer like we normally would if we were together? Father, I just pray right now that God, in the midst of all of this chaos, I'm so grateful that we're able to meet this way. It would be awesome if we could be together. But God, I know that that's not possible right now. But God, even right now through, technology, we're able to worship together, hear a word together, hear a great testimony together, and we're thankful. But God, we realize that it's already one thing to live life as it is, and life can throw a lot of things at you. But God, when I think about what's going on with COVID and how it's impacting our region and our nation and around the world, God, we're asking you to intervene. God, if there was ever a time to have you speak a word just like you did to the storm, this is it. And so, Lord, we pray today that, God, you would minister to so many, that, God, you would cause COVID to stop dead in its tracks. We pray, Father God, that you would minister to families that have lost loved ones or God, are facing illness, or they're in the hospital, or they're on ventilators today, that God, you would bring healing right now. And Father, for all of our frontline workers, all those that are exposed because of being an essential service, God, we just pray that you would watch over them. God, we pray for all of our regional leaders, everything from municipal, provincial to our national leaders, Lord God, and we think about the decisions that weigh on their hearts, Lord God, the things that they have to do, Lord God, to help keep us safe as a nation, as a region. God, it's not an easy thing, and we pray for their wisdom. And God, for every family that, God, in our house, in our church family, I thank you for them. And Lord, would you minister to them today? I pray that, God, your presence would fill their homes. I pray that, God, now as we get to your word, that, God, you would give us ears to hear, Holy Spirit, what, God, you want to say. And God, may we just continue to have that sense of your presence as we get into your word. We just declare those things right now in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Hey, listen, can I just remind you as well that as we just prayed right now, I think about the fact that throughout the week, we want to know what's going on. We want to be in prayer for you. We want to be in contact with you. So feel free to connect with us at the church at any point, whether by email or phone call, but more specifically, prayer. And if you need prayer, please email us, prayer@communitychurch.ca. We want to make sure that you know that you're loved and valued and that someone's praying for you all week long if you're facing something, even if it's not related to COVID. Man, we know life is still happening, and so we want to make sure that you know that someone's praying for you. And if you do it now in the next hour or so, and you send your request and you put your phone number in there, someone from our prayer team is going to give you a call today and pray with you right on the phone. We just want to make sure that we're ministering to you at this time and in this season. The other thing I also want to mention is just our giving. I just want to say thank you so much for all your faithfulness and your giving over the last number of weeks. I know it's been crazy, but I want to continue to encourage you. Continue to resource the kingdom of God. Let's be faithful to what God calls us to and trust God to be faithful in his promises. And I know that he will. And like I said last week, giving is both biblical and practical. And your resources help us to continue to do what we're doing throughout the week, whether it's preparing for a Sunday service like this, or making phone calls, or doing Spark Online, or doing some of the other things that we're doing around the property, different things like that. We still continue. So we really do need you to continue to be faithful in your giving. And thank you so much as you're doing that, as you're tithing, as you're giving that gift as an act of worship. And hey, listen, maybe you're not aware of some of the ways that you can give, or maybe you're a guest and this is the first time, or maybe the last number of weeks you've seen us online and you thought, hey, I'd like to, give towards Community Church. I really enjoyed the worship, the word, enjoy their ministry. Hey, listen, all you have to do is either go to your local bank or through your online banking. You can find Community Church. If not, contact our bookkeeper, Felicia, and you can reach her, bookkeeper@communitychurch.ca, and she'll help you know what to find as far as your online banking. Of course, you can give through the website, and that's credit card only, just so you know about that, but you can do it that way. Or if you contact Felicia with that email address that I just said, she'll help you make alternate arrangements, whether it's e-transfer or maybe a time where you drop it off at the office, some of that kind of stuff. But again, I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you for your faithfulness. It's been awesome to see, and we are so grateful. Well, I want to jump in here to our series again, The Walking Wounded. We started last week, and if you remember, we talked about Hebrews chapter 12. And Hebrews chapter 12 tells us about the fact that God has already marked out a race for us to run. And it's not just about doing, but it's everything that God wants us to experience. And if you remember, Paul encourages us and say, hey, listen, as you're running this race, throw off everything that hinders. Meaning anything that gets in your way to keep you from running the race, throw it off, get rid of it. But I like how the Passion Translation puts it. It says, let us, let go of the wounds that have pierced us. And that's what we've been talking about. Because if there's anything that can derail us, it's wounds. And one of those wounds is rejection. And that's what I want to talk about today. Rejection, I say this about rejection, it has no favorites. The truth is that every one of us on some level, in some way, shape or form, we've all experienced rejection. That feeling of not being wanted, or, not being capable, or told we're not capable, or we don't measure up to the expectation of someone, whether it's a job or a job interview, or maybe you felt like you're not garnering the kind of attention that you would like to have from somebody, and so it makes you feel like you're not so worthy. Rejection is a tough thing. Rejection is a wound that can really derail you. I was thinking about that, and it actually brought me back to my junior high days, funny enough. You wouldn't think rejection and growing up as a kid necessarily, but for me, I thought about grade 6. And in grade 6, I had this friend, and she was awesome. We hung around together, we laughed together. We were just really close, but she started to develop some feelings for me, that junior high crush kind of thing. And listen, I can't blame her. I mean, Cora would tell you that. I mean, hello, I'm a catch, right? And some of you are going, no, you're not, PC. You're the kind of catch that when someone catches you, they throw you back. Yeah, well, but I'm still a catch, I'm just saying. But jokes aside, I remember in grade 6 a number of times where I'd come to my desk or a friend would hand me a note from her. You remember those famous "Do you like me" notes? The ones that you would hand that says, "Do you like me? Yes box, no box, maybe box." Or it's like, we got to just something, please tell me, give me something. And so we've all done it. And I would come to my desk every once in a while and that would be there. And I felt horrible. because I didn't like her that way. I liked her as a friend. I enjoyed our friendship, but I didn't have any interest in, having a relationship with her, dating her in grade 6. I know that's kind of crazy to think, and if you're my kids and you're watching this right now, you're not allowed to date in grade 6. I'm just throwing it out there. And that's really for my youngest, Abby. She's not quite there yet, but I'm just saying. But I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to devastate her. I know that by, checking the maybe box, we give her some sense of hope that, she'll be able to one day say, 20 years later, hey, my street cred is higher because, well, I dated Pastor Craig, or Craig Luff, that kind of a thing. And again, of course, I'm kidding, but you know what I'm talking about. I didn't want to hurt her, and I knew that if I checked that box, no, that was going to happen. But I had to. And the thing is, we might joke about that and laugh about that, but here's the thing. If you go back to what it was like being in junior high and you started thinking back to the emotions and the mindset, that you had and how you saw life through that lens, you would see that note and that act as a big step. I mean, she was putting herself out there, and she's not the only one. We all did it. And you've got this hope that the note's going to come back with that box checked yes. And in fact, I think that's why we put the maybe box, because we would rather have a soft maybe, like there's a chance, than an outright no, because it would dash all our hopes, because we have a hope that something's going to come back in the way that we want it to. And that's the thing about rejection. If there's any wound that could dash hope instantly, it's rejection. Whether it's you didn't get picked for the team, or when you're on the playground and someone picks you last, or you're in gym and you get picked last to play volleyball or soccer or whatever, or somebody's grandmother with a cane gets picked over you, like you feel rejection. You feel like somebody didn't want you, or maybe it's bigger than that and a little bit further in your life where you're applying for a job and you don't get that job, or maybe you got passed over for that promotion and you were really thinking that, man, that's mine and that would be perfect for me, but you don't get it, and you get your hopes up, and then you get your answer and you feel that rejection, that feeling of being unwanted, or maybe you don't have, what it takes. Or maybe you've experienced, that horrible feeling that a lot of people, unfortunately, have experienced in the way of either being unwanted or not accepted, or maybe even ostracized from a family member. Maybe it's a parent, or maybe it's a child, or maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's a spouse, or maybe it's not even in your family, but it's in your circle of friends, and you just feel like you're being not included in it. If there's anything that can dash hope, that's rejection. And not only that, the thing about rejection is if it's left, and they say this about wounds in any case, that wounds that are left and not dealt with, they will fester. They will get bigger and larger, and they will be more damaging to you than you could ever realize. And when I think about that, if there's anything that could derail our dreams and our desires, or better yet, the desires and the dreams that God has for us, it's rejection. And it might start out with, not feeling so great, and you don't want to hang out with anybody, and so you get a little disconnect. And then from the disconnect, you start feeling lonely. Some people, the severity of what they experience in the way of rejection in a certain circumstance, or how harsh it was, or how they perceived it. Some people, they get so paralyzed emotionally that they'll never try to do something new again, or they'll never venture into another step or an opportunity or even a relationship, because they think to themselves, well, man, if somebody said no to me then, what makes me think that they're going to say yes to me now? And if you pictured, rejection like a train, it's got a one-track mind. And it'll just keep going further and further and further. It won't stop. In fact, where it really wants to land is to get you to a place, and this is the most unfortunate place, is when you get to a place that you are so discouraged and so broken because of the rejection, that you get to a place where you're beginning to have this intense self-criticism come upon you, where you start to think to yourself, well, what am I missing? Am I not good enough? Am I not skilled enough? Is there something that I could have done, or is there something that I am doing? Like, what would it take to garner their attention? And the problem with that is not only obvious, but let me just say this. It'll lead you to a place where you'll begin to question your self-worth, and your self-worth will begin to erode. And I got news for you. That's not God's plan for your life. And like you, I can totally relate to that. Like anybody, I said it earlier, man, this whole idea of feeling rejected, it knows no favorites. Every one of us has experienced. I've experienced it personally. In fact, I've experienced it as a pastor. There's been a few times in my ministry over the years that, man, I've experienced everything from, hey, we don't think you're a good pastor, to we don't think you're a good preacher. We don't like the way you dress. We don't like the way you lead. We don't like how you structure things. And sometimes they get so angry they might leave the church, or, they might just ignore you and, not talk to you or whatever. And in fact, I remember this one time, when I was in ministry and I had a phone call with somebody who I knew was a little bit frustrated with me. And in the course of that conversation, I found out, man, they were really frustrated with me. They really didn't enjoy how I was leading, how I was pastoring, and the list was long. So finally, at one point in the conversation, all of a sudden they said to me, they said, Pastor Craig, I just want you to admit to me right now on this phone that this season of your ministry, that all that you have done and accomplished, that you have simply failed. Now, can you imagine if you were me on the other end? It did not feel good. Man, I wrestled with that. But I want to say something to you today. That like you, I've walked through rejection, and I've had to go through the process, and it is a process. And I know that it's hard to get through, but there's a difference between something that is hard to get through and something that is impossible. And I want you to know that even though rejection is something that is hard to get through, you need to know today it's not impossible. And I'll tell you why it's not impossible. Because God doesn't want it to be a part of your life. At the end of the day, God values you, and no matter what you experience in the way of rejection, no matter what anybody says, just remember this: God has a plan for your life. He has this incredible journey for you, and you can understand why we need to deal with, rejection. This is why it can lead you into what I call, and you've heard me say this at Community, the spiral. You dig yourself deep and you don't know how to get out of it. God doesn't want you to be buried in that. God has a plan for your life. And it's not just about doing, it's about being. It's about discovering and experiencing all that He has for you. And I want you to know that I've experienced that. I know many others that have experienced that. There are many others, in the Scripture that experienced that. One of them was Joseph. Because I could tell you stories about everybody else. I didn't even tell you about Jesus, but I felt led to talk about Joseph. Joseph, who many of you would know, and maybe if you don't, let me just tell you, Joseph was one of the most significant major players in the history of Israel. He was born and raised to be a leader at a certain time that was so vital for the survival of not just Egypt or the land around him, but God's people. And so, he went through a lot of things. There's no doubt about that, man. If you know the story of Joseph, man, he went through a lot of challenges. In fact, they say 13 years of constantly dealing with some battles. But he rose to the top, to the point where he had such influence and such favor and such leadership that only Pharaoh could call him out. He had influence all over Egypt and all over the land. And one of the things that he was in position for was to prepare Egypt and the entire land for a famine that was about to come. And because of his wisdom that God gave him and the strategy and everything else and the influence and the favor, he prepared that place and those people for years of famine. But here's the thing. Like I said earlier, his journey to that point was not an easy one. And even more so based on how it started. It started with facing rejection. And the kind of rejection that he faced is one of the worst kinds. It's from his family. You see, Genesis chapter 37 is where it starts. We pick up the story where Jacob has the son. His name is Joseph. And at the time in Genesis 37, he was 17 years old. And as a 17-year-old man, like you're just enjoying life. And it happens to say that, Joseph was actually loved by his father Jacob. And it actually says that he was loved even more than all of his other brothers. Now, I've got siblings, so I know how that works. I've got kids, and I know how that works. That would not be cool. But here's the thing. You have to understand why Joseph had a special place in Jacob's heart. You see, even though he was the 11th born of all of, the sons of Jacob, he was actually the firstborn of Rachel, Jacob's wife. And Jacob adored Rachel. But for a lot of years, she was completely barren. She couldn't have kids. And so for Jacob, having Joseph was an absolute miracle. It was like a blessing to him because, his wife finally was able to have a child, which in that culture, in that day, that was a significant thing. It's still significant today, by the way. But all I'm saying is that Joseph had this special place in Jacob's heart because of that. The problem is that Jacob probably took it a little far. I mean, he had the coat of many colors and all that. We all know that story. And it didn't help because Joseph was a little bit of a younger brother, right? Like a little bit of a tattletale. He would tell on his brothers. And then, of course, in that season, God was starting to give him dreams. And those dreams were about what God was calling him to, and he saw himself rising to a place of authority, even to the point where his brothers would be under his authority. They would even bow down to him. And of course, like any good little brother, he's got to brag about it. He's like, one day you guys are going to bow down to me. And of course, that didn't go over well. But listen, it not only didn't go over well, here's how it went over. Genesis 37 says that they hated Joseph. And that word in the Hebrew actually means to think evil. That every time they saw Joseph, every time that, they were around him, they were so irritated that they wanted to take out his life. I mean, just think about I've got siblings and they might irritate me and I'm sure I irritate them. Although to be, very clear and on the record, guaranteed they irritate me more than I irritate them. I'm just saying. But I couldn't even imagine wanting to take the life of my sibling, but that's what they did. A little later on in Genesis, you see that they're off in the fields. The brothers are all out in the fields. And so Jacob says, hey, Joseph, I want you to go find your brothers. And so he goes. And when he finds them and they see him coming in the distance, the brothers start talking. They're like, listen, this dreamer, man, we can't stand him. Let's take him out. Let's kill him. Let's drop him in some pit and let's go home and we'll just tell our father that, hey, he was attacked by some wild animal and, it's unfortunate, Dad. We really feel bad. And we'll give him this whole sob story. But guys, let's just take his life. Well, Reuben, the oldest brother, was like, nah, guys, we can't do that. I get that he's annoying, but we're not going to take his life. But why don't we just throw him in a pit and then we'll take off and we'll just leave him there. The thing is that Reuben had every intention of coming back. There was something in Reuben's heart that he just felt like this wasn't right. But while they were discussing this, all of a sudden there was this caravan of traders that were on their way to Egypt. And so the brothers started talking again and said, you know what, Reuben, not so cool with your idea. We've got a better one. You're right. We're not going to take his life. We're going to sell him. We're going to sell him as a slave to these traders. And so they sold him for 20 coins of silver. That was like the average price that you would pay for a slave. And the thing is, when you study this, when you look into, what would have happened in this moment, probably for like the next 30 days, their little brother was now going to be chained and he's going to walk by foot all the way to Egypt. He's going to be treated like any baggage or luggage that they would have had, like he's just property. And most likely by the time he gets to Egypt, he's going to be sold just like merchandise. They knew that. And they didn't care. They hated him so much. They rejected him so much that they just wanted to get rid of him. Genesis 42 actually gives us a really good insight on what Joseph was feeling in that moment. There was a moment in Genesis 42 where the brothers get talking about what they saw the moment that they sold their brother. It says that they saw his distress. The Amplified Version says that they saw the anguish of his soul. I mean, just think about that language. That's pretty powerful. And on top of that, they talked about how he pleaded for his life. He begged them, tears in his eyes, guys, please do not do this to me. Do not set me on this road. Can you imagine if you're Joseph and you're being sold for 30 pieces of silver? Talk about feeling rejection. Talk about feeling unwanted. This is your brothers. This is your blood, and they don't care. Your life doesn't mean any more than 20 pieces of silver. That's hard. But I want you to know something. Man, God led him on a journey. And God dealt with his rejection. I can tell you that. Why? Because of Genesis 50. At the pinnacle of his rise to power and authority, the fulfillment of the dreams that God was giving him. Even though in this particular case, yes, Joseph's journey started with rejection, but I'm going to tell you something, it ended with redemption. And not just redemption in the way of his own life, but man, there was just a restoring of the relationship with his brothers. Genesis 50 tells a story of a moment at the very, very top end. The famine's going on. The brothers travel to Egypt because they needed grain. They had no idea that Joseph was even still alive. And after a few encounters with Joseph, thinking that he was just some Egyptian leader, they come to discover that now this is their little brother. And they started to fear. Who wouldn't fear? Talk about an incredible moment for Joseph to exact revenge. I mean, he could have just said the word, and in an instant, their lives could be gone. The very thing that they plotted to do, they could be experiencing themselves. But Joseph didn't do that. He didn't exact revenge. In fact, he gave them the opposite of what they deserved and what he got. He said this, verse 20 to 21. He said, you know what? I understand that you intended to harm me. I recognize, guys, you hurt me. You didn't care about my life. You wanted to take out my life. You rejected me. But God intended, meaning God used it for good, to accomplish what's now being done. Talk about a perspective change, which I'll get to in a second. He said, but now what's being done is because of God, and it's the saving of so many lives. So listen, don't be afraid. I'm going to provide for you and your children. And then I love this last line, verse 21. And he reassured them, and he spoke kindly to them. Talk about perspective change. Talking about this moment where he could have just shouted to the rooftops all of the bitterness, the rage, the anger, which a lot of people will tell you, man, that's one of the roads that rejection will take you. Eventually, you'll get to a place where you're angry and bitter and all that kind of stuff. But he didn't get there. And I'm going to tell you the reason why he didn't get there was because of God. Now, I want to say this before I get into some thoughts here of what I think he experienced and what I know I've experienced personally. But you know, rejection is a process, and I just want to say that. And I was listening to a TED Talk a couple of weeks ago as I was preparing for this message, and they talked about some of the things that you can do practically in the way of process. And there are some incredible things that you can do that I did myself, that I still do to this moment. Things like having zero tolerance for self-criticism. You know, sometimes, man, we can dig ourselves in a hole and we can criticize every single thing, every little thing, and that's not good. Or things like, hey, listen, take some time and remind yourself of the good things that you do bring. Maybe you're funny, maybe you're an athlete, maybe you're good with math, or maybe you're just good socially, whatever it is. But remind yourself of the value that you do bring to the table, no matter what rejection you face. Or things like building up the connections around you. Man, that is so important. Finding people that know you and know you well, coming alongside you and building you up and encouraging you. That's my heart, my prayer for anybody that's a part of community or anybody that I encounter, that my life would be used to build them up according to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11. But can I say this, and you've heard me say this many, many times. For me, the faith journey is practical and spiritual. There are steps that we can take, but then there are things that only God can do. And I honestly can tell you that as much as those things can do a lot of great things, and you should do them, I've done them, I still do them, nothing can ever do what God can do. And that's what I think, in this whole journey that Joseph experienced. I think he experienced these things because I look at Joseph's life and I can relate to some of the things that I think he experienced, because you don't get to say those kinds of things until you've experienced some certain truths with God. So for example, let me just say this. Here's what I've learned and what I think Joseph experienced in the way of while he was walking through rejection. No matter who rejects you, no matter what rejects you, just know this, that God always receives you. God sees great value in you. He loves you. And listen, you have to think about that. That's the God of the universe, the creator of the universe, the Alpha and the Omega. And for him to look at you and love you, and remember, he knows more about you than you know about yourself. He knows about the things that you don't want anybody else to know, and yet he loves you. Listen, I love how Genesis 39, several moments in Genesis 39, you'll see that Joseph, it says about Joseph, either people recognize or Joseph realizes it himself, that the Lord was with him. Man, God's presence was an affirmation, and his very presence and his guidance and his leading and the investment that he was making in Joseph's life all the way through all of the challenges and beginning with the rejection and the pain of that rejection. God was there. God provided the very thing that his family should have. The care, the love, man, like everything that the family should have done, God did. Every single step of the way. He provided along the way. And I want to encourage you, I've discovered that the more that I lean into Jesus, the more I find him. And the more I find him, the more reassured I am about my value. I think about words like 1 Peter chapter 2. And in 1 Peter chapter 2, it starts by talking about Jesus who knew rejection. He knew rejection from his family. He knew rejection from his own disciples. He knew rejection from the crowds that thought he was super popular. Even when he was in the garden, he felt like God had forsaken him. He knows rejection. But first Peter tells us that, hey, he was chosen and he was precious, and he is. And we're going to celebrate that, next weekend with Easter weekend coming. But here's the thing. If you go down a little further in 1 Peter chapter 2, you'll see that in the same way, he turns his conversation. He says, and for you, the people of God, the children of God, those that have a relationship with God, all of humanity, listen to this. He loves you deeply. And he wants you to be a part of his family, because if you're a part of his family, he sees you as this prized possession. You're chosen. No matter what anybody says, if you can hear that whisper, I guarantee you, it's going to make a difference. A couple other things that caught my eye as I look at the life of Joseph that I know really has impacted my own journey as well, and I can see it for myself. Here's something else. Rejection doesn't define your future. You notice that he started out super rejected, and yet the purposes and the plans of God still came to pass. Sometimes rejection can make us feel like, man, the plan of God is not going to happen. I'm not worthy of it. Why would God want to use me? All of those kinds of thoughts will enter in your mind when you allow rejection to run its routes. But if you realize and take a step back and understand that God truly values you, no matter what anybody says, know this, that no matter who rejects you or what rejects you, it will never determine your future. God determines your steps. That's what the scripture says. God is still going to use you, and he will work through you, and he'll do what he needs to do. When I look back into that phone call that I mentioned earlier, man, it devastated me. But I remember it was just a few days later that I started to think to myself, no, I don't receive that, because I know that I'm called. I know that God has a plan for my life. I know that I'm valued. And to be honest with you, man, I've never even given it much thought since then, because I know that my life is in his hands. And whatever God's got planned and whatever he has in purpose in my life in the way of purpose, I know it's still going to happen no matter what anybody says. It's not going to derail me. And it didn't derail Joseph, and it doesn't have to derail you. But here's the last one. The last one is that you need to remember that rejection doesn't have to bury you. What I mean by that is that, we could look at Genesis 50 and go, man, he's a different person. He sees things differently. His perspective had changed. And the ability to say, hey, listen, I'm going to take care of you. Obviously, at some point, he had dealt with rejection and had forgiven his brothers. But let me just affirm that for a second, because, man, I'll tell you, rejection can lead you to a place where you just feel so guilty and you just feel like you're worthless. And you feel like it'll just stop you dead in your tracks. But I'm going to tell you something. God can heal you. I promise you, he can heal you. And I know he will heal you. Genesis chapter 41, verse 50. There was a moment just before the famine hit. And Joseph had 2 sons. His wife had given birth to 2 sons. And when you named your children, there was always something significant about the name. And in the case of Joseph, many believe that the reason he chose the names that he chose was a reflection of the journey that he had been on and the result of that journey. His first son, he named him Manasseh, which literally means to cause someone to forget or to allow someone to forget. What Joseph was saying is that God has done such a work in my life that it's enabled me to be able to let go of my bitter past. I'm going to tell you something. Rejection doesn't want you to let go. It wants you to get bitter. But God doesn't want you to stay bitter. And I'm telling you, if you allow God to do the healing, if you walk the journey and the processes that many others will come around and share with you, things like friends and their investment and not getting into self-criticism and just allowing God to do an inner work inside of you. He had to have done that in Joseph. There's no way that he could say the things that he said or even make this declaration if he didn't feel that way. He was able to let it go. You will be able to let it go. Just keep leaning into God. The other name that he gave to his second son was Ephraim, which means double portion. Man, I go back to what he said in Genesis 50, verse 20 and 21. He said, listen, I know what you intended to do to me. It was to harm me, but God intended good for my life. And he had so much good in his life that when he looked back from his journey and how it started and where it was in that moment, he felt like, God, I'm not only blessed, but Ephraim literally means to have doubly fruitful, like double portion blessing. Man, I'm going to tell you something. Let God do his thing, and you will look back, especially in the area of rejection, and you will see not just a blessing, but more than you can ever imagine. And I want to encourage you today as I end on that note, man, lean into God. And can I just encourage the church? Can I encourage all of our church family? This is one of the reasons why I value our community groups and our time together. We have a rule. I mentioned it earlier. I'll say it again. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11 says that, it's a call and it's a challenge that we would absolutely encourage one another and build each other up. We have an opportunity to help those that have faced and experienced rejection on any level. Some have spiraled into rejection and it's devastated and derailed them. And we can be a part of the process that while God's doing his thing, we can be doing our part by building each other up, encouraging. Can I just leave you with this one note? Find someone this week and call them and encourage them and build them up. And if you've faced rejection or you're still dealing with rejection, know that you have a God that can take you on a journey just like Joseph, and he will heal you. Let's pray. God, I just pray for every person that has ever experienced rejection on a level that God has almost gotten to a place of derailing them, or maybe it has. It's dashed their sense of hope. They feel like, God, there's no way out. They feel like their self-worth right now, Lord God, they're just not valuable. And God, that's the opposite of the message that you want to speak inside their lives today. And so, Holy Spirit, even right now, wherever they are, I just pray that your presence would fill that room. That, God, they would feel your loving arms wrapping around them right now, and they would hear your voice declaring things like 1 Peter chapter 2, that, God, you see them as this chosen, this prized possession. And so, God, I pray that you'd minister to them. And that, God, as they do all of the practical steps and things that I mentioned, and as they trust and they lean into you, I pray that, God, they would share that testimony because I know, I'm confident, God, I know because you've done it for me. You did it for Joseph. You did it for so many others that, God, if they do it, they're going to come out of this and they're going to be doubly blessed and they're going to be able to let go of the bitter past. And that way they can embrace the incredible future you have for them. So I speak that over their lives right now in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Hey, I just want to say thank you for joining us. Remember, don't forget Good Friday at 11 and Easter Sunday morning 11. This is Community Church. I'm Pastor Craig, and I want to tell you, if there's a church that you're not a part of, you're new to the community, just know there will always be a place for you to belong right here. God bless you, everybody.